The war had been long, grueling, and bloody. But now, Captain Alden Cray stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, gazing at the vast star system where the final battle had been fought. His crew had done it. They had crushed the enemy's fleet, securing humanity's dominance in this corner of the galaxy. The battle was over, and now the spoils of victory were to be divided. The alien races that had fought with and against them gathered in the grand hall aboard the Vanguard, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Alden had always been the strategic leader, always focused on the mission, but something about today felt different. It wasn't just the victory. It was what they were going to find in the spoils. As the representatives from various alien factions filed into the hall, Alden watched, scanning the faces. The humans had earned a large share of the victory, but it was clear that the alliances they had formed during the conflict would need to be maintained with care. The galaxy was a delicate web of politics, and Alden was a master at navigating it. But today, something caught his attention in a way that no politician ever could. When the division of spoils began, Alden's mind began to wander. But then he saw her. At first, it was almost a blur, just a figure standing among the treasures laid out before them. The gold, the advanced alien tech, and weaponry all glistened in the light, but his gaze was fixed on her, standing off to the side with a quiet defiance in her eyes. She wasn't like the others, the alien dignitaries who were here to negotiate, here to claim their share of the victory. She was different. She was real. Her name was Lyra. Alden learned later, a survivor from a race long thought to be destroyed. She had been a prisoner of war, captured by the Vicari during their brutal campaign across the galaxy. Now, with their defeat, Lyra had become an unexpected piece in this vast puzzle. The representatives seemed unconcerned with her presence. After all, she was just another asset, a gift for the humans. But Alden could not look away. There was something in the way she carried herself, the sharpness in her eyes that spoke of intelligence and resilience. She didn't seem like the type of prisoner to meekly accept her fate. Instead, she exuded a quiet strength, the kind that made her stand out even in a room full of powerful beings. As the ceremony continued, Alden tried to focus, to pay attention to the distribution of the treasures and technology. The human delegation was taking their fair share of the spoils, of course, but Alden's mind kept drifting back to Lyra. Her people, he had been told, were part of a once great civilization that had been shattered by the Vicari. She had lived through the worst of the galaxy's wars and come out with her spirit intact. Yet here she was, a mere prize, in a game of political and military maneuvering. Alden wasn't sure what to make of her. Was she a symbol of victory, or something much more? When it was his turn to step up to receive his share, Alden finally approached the table where Lyra stood. She didn't flinch when he came near, but her eyes locked onto his with a quiet intensity. He could feel her watching him, studying him in the same way he was studying her. She didn't look like a mere prisoner. She was something more, something dangerous, perhaps. He felt a sudden curiosity, an urge to know more about her. Why was she here? What did she want from him, or from this alliance? The room buzzed around them, but for a long moment, it felt like Alden and Lyra were the only two people in the universe. He had seen many battles, faced down countless enemies, but none of them had captivated him like she did. As he turned away and continued the ceremony, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this encounter, was only the beginning of something far bigger than any victory he had ever known. Little did he know, Lyra was not just a prisoner of war. She was a key to something much more dangerous, and the price of their victory was only just beginning to be understood. Captain Alden Cray couldn't stop thinking about Lyra. The victory ceremony had ended, but his thoughts were still locked on her, the mysterious alien girl who had stood silently among the spoils. He had seen many prisoners of war before, but Lyra was different. There was a fire in her eyes, a quiet strength that didn't match the defeated image most captives carried. As the human delegation moved to secure their share of the spoils, Alden found himself growing restless. He had to know more about her. The following day, Alden arranged for a private meeting with Lyra. He didn't know exactly why he felt this need, but there was something about her that called to him. His officers were surprised when he requested to meet with her alone. She wasn't even really part of the negotiations, just a prize, a bargaining chip. But to Alden, she seemed far more important than anyone realized. When they met in the dimly lit conference room aboard the Vanguard, Alden felt the weight of her gaze. She didn't sit, nor did she offer any gesture of submission. Her posture was straight, almost regal. For a moment, they just stared at each other, as if sizing each other up. Alden had dealt with his fair share of alien species, but something about Lyra made him hesitate. She didn't act like a prisoner. She didn't act like someone who had just been handed over as part of a war bargain. "I'm Captain Alden Cray." He introduced himself, though he suspected she already knew. "And you are Lyra." Her lips barely moved as she nodded, the small motion carrying more weight than it should have. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes that made Alden's heart race. He had to know more. "You're not like the others," he said, his voice low. "Why do you look at me like that? Like I'm something you're trying to figure out." Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him with those piercing eyes. Her silence spoke volumes. This wasn't just a conversation between a victor and a prisoner. This was a meeting of minds, both of them aware of the unspoken tension that filled the room. Alden could feel it, the weight of her unvoiced thoughts. And then, after a long pause, she finally spoke. "You humans," she began, her voice smooth but sharp, "you think you understand everything. But you don't. You never have. Not truly." Alden raised an eyebrow. He was used to alien species having their own views on humanity, but this felt different. She wasn't afraid of him, not in the way most prisoners were. Instead, she seemed aware. "What do you mean by that?" Her gaze softened, but only slightly. "I mean that you think I am a prisoner. But I am not. I am something much more dangerous than that." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't even know what you've taken, do you?" Alden's pulse quickened. He had heard rumors about Lyra's people, how they were rumored to be one of the most ancient and powerful civilizations in the galaxy. But no one had ever really believed it. The Vicari had wiped them out. Or so they thought. Lyra, standing before him, didn't look like a fragile survivor. She looked like something far more dangerous. But what was she really? "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice now almost a whisper. "I carry the knowledge of 1,000 worlds," she replied, her words sharp as a blade. "I know things that could either save or destroy your people. My civilization did not die, Captain, it was merely waiting. And now you have awakened it." Alden didn't know whether to be excited or terrified. She was speaking like a weapon, but not just any weapon, a weapon of unimaginable power. His mind raced. This wasn't just a prisoner. This wasn't just a girl who had been captured in the aftermath of a war. Lyra was something far more complex. She was a living archive, holding the secrets of her people and perhaps the future of the galaxy. But could he trust her? Before Alden could respond, Lyra's expression shifted, becoming even more intense. "You'll want to know more," she said, her voice low, "but you will need to decide what kind of future you want. There are those who would kill to have me by their side. Others will stop at nothing to destroy me. And then there's the matter of your own people. What will you do when you realize the cost of this victory? When you understand the price of the knowledge I carry?" Alden swallowed hard. He had always been a soldier, a leader of men. But this was unlike anything he had ever faced. There was danger in Lyra, but there was something else too, something he couldn't quite put into words. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a key to something much bigger. He just didn't know yet whether it would unlock a new era or destroy everything he had worked for. As Lyra turned and walked out of the room, Alden couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had known had just changed. The galaxy had just shifted on its axis, and Lyra was at the center of it. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Captain Alden Cray found himself constantly thinking about Lyra, her cryptic words echoing in his mind. The more he thought about their conversation, the more questions arose. What did she mean when she said her civilization wasn't dead? What kind of power did she hold inside her? The galaxy was already a dangerous place, but Lyra's presence seemed to open up a whole new layer of mystery. He had never encountered anything like her before. Despite the growing unease in his chest, Alden couldn't help but feel a strange connection to her. There was something about the way she carried herself, her strength, her intelligence, that drew him in. She was not like the prisoners he had encountered in his years of service. She wasn't meek, nor was she broken by the wars she had endured. Instead, she seemed to be a force of her own, someone who had survived and fought through unimaginable circumstances. Alden found himself wanting to know more about her, not just as a piece of the spoils of war, but as a person. Alden decided to speak with Lyra again. This time, he arranged the meeting in a more private setting, one where he could talk to her without the watchful eyes of the council or his crew. As he walked into the small room where they were to meet, his heart raced. He had no idea what kind of answers he would get, or if she would even be willing to speak to him again. But he knew he had to try. The stakes were too high now, and the answers he needed could be buried deep within her. When he entered, Lyra was already there, standing near the window, her back to him. She didn't turn around when he walked in, but Alden could feel her awareness of his presence. It was as if she was always waiting for him, always prepared for whatever came next. Her calmness only made the air feel heavier, filled with tension. "I need to understand more, Lyra," Alden said, his voice softer than he intended. "What is it that you're hiding? What is this power you claim to have?" For a long moment, Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she turned slightly, her eyes meeting his for the first time since their last meeting. There was no fear in her gaze, no hesitation. Only something deeper, something older than Alden could fathom. She was not just a prisoner, he realized. She was a key to something far more complicated than any of them had imagined. "I'm not hiding anything, Captain," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "But there are things in this galaxy that your people, are not ready for. I carry the knowledge of my ancestors, knowledge that could change the balance of power. But with that knowledge comes danger. My people knew that, and that is why they kept it buried for so long." Alden felt his curiosity growing, but there was also a sense of dread building in his chest. This wasn't just about knowledge, it was about survival. Her people had hidden something away, and now it seemed like the galaxy might be on the brink of discovering it. But could it really be something that powerful? Alden wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. Lyra wasn't just a victim in this situation. She was a player in a game much larger than anyone could have imagined. "The weapon you speak of," Alden began, his voice trailing off as he searched for the right words. "Is it a weapon of war? Something your people created?" Lyra's eyes softened, but there was no warmth in her gaze. "It is not a weapon of destruction," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "It is a weapon of knowledge, a power that can shake the future. But it is not something to be taken lightly. Whoever controls it controls the fate of entire civilizations." Alden's mind raced. He had always been a soldier, a leader, and had learned to trust in facts and logic. But everything about Lyra and her people defied logic. What she was saying sounded like the stuff of legends, ancient myths of the universe. How could one person, one species, hold so much power? What could they possibly have created that could alter the course of galactic history? "You're saying this knowledge could change everything?" Alden asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded. "Yes, Captain. Everything. The galaxy is full of ancient secrets, secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. But now, they are stirring, and soon, everyone will know. The question is, will you be ready?" Alden took a step back, trying to process everything. Lyra was not just a prisoner. She was a harbinger of something far more dangerous. The weight of her words pressed on him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the cold grip of uncertainty. He had always been able to rely on his crew, on his mission, but now it seemed that everything had changed. Lyra's gaze remained steady, as though she were waiting for him to make a decision. And in that moment, Alden realized that this was no longer just a Captain Alden Cray had always prided himself on making decisions swiftly and with clarity. He was a man of action, a leader who had steered his crew through countless battles and challenges. But now, standing on the precipice of something far greater than any war he had faced, Alden found himself questioning everything. Lyra's words haunted him, her cryptic warnings weighing heavily on his mind. The knowledge she held could change the entire course of the galaxy, and yet Alden wasn't sure if humanity was ready for such power. For the next few days, Alden could hardly focus on anything else. His crew could sense the shift in his demeanor, his usually steady and determined presence now clouded with uncertainty. The negotiations with the other alien factions were progressing as planned, but every decision Alden made felt wrong. How could he balance the need for peace with the looming threat Lyra had warned him about? And more importantly, could he trust her? Alden's thoughts often drifted back to the quiet conversations he'd had with her. In the privacy of their talks, Lyra had revealed bits and pieces of her people's history, how they had once been a dominant force in the galaxy, their knowledge spanning countless worlds. But the more she spoke, the clearer it became that this knowledge wasn't just a gift, it was a curse. Lyra had explained that her civilization had chosen to hide their most dangerous secrets, fearing what would happen if those with less noble intentions discovered them. The question was no longer whether the knowledge would be uncovered, but who would control it once it was. One evening, after a long day of discussions, Alden found himself in his private quarters, staring out into the vastness of space. His mind was racing with possibilities, and yet the answers seemed just out of reach. He could feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. This wasn't just about military strength or alliances, it was about the future of everything. Lyra's warning echoed in his mind. The question is, will you be ready? Alden's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on his door. He turned, and before he could speak, the door slid open. It was Lyra. Her presence seemed to fill the room, her silence speaking volumes. She didn't need to say anything. Alden knew she had come to speak with him again. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. There was something more between them now. An unspoken understanding, perhaps even a bond. You wanted to talk. Lyra's voice was calm, but there was a tension in the air. Her eyes locked onto Alden's, a mixture of urgency and uncertainty in them. It was as if she, too, knew that their next conversation would change everything. Alden gestured for her to sit. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "about everything you've told me. The knowledge you carry, the power it holds. And I have to ask, is it worth the risk?" Lyra's expression didn't change. She sat down slowly, her gaze never leaving his. "What is the risk, Captain?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "The real risk is that the knowledge will be discovered, whether by you or by someone else. The power is not mine to give or take. It exists, whether you choose to face it or not. The only question is whether you, and your people, can handle it." Alden's brow furrowed. He had heard her words before, but now they seemed to hold more weight. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. "You say we're not ready," he said. "But is that because of us? Or is it because you don't want us to know? Because if we understand, if we unlock what your people left behind, then it's not just a matter of power, it's a matter of control." Lyra paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not wrong," she said after a long silence. "There is a reason why my people chose to hide it, but not out of fear of what you might do, out of fear of what others might do. You must understand, Captain, there are factions, races, in the galaxy who would stop at nothing to seize that power, to control it, and they would do anything to destroy anyone who stands in their way." Alden leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He could feel the weight of her words pressing on him. He had always been a leader of soldiers, but this was different. This wasn't about fighting wars. This was about fighting for the future of the galaxy itself. Lyra wasn't just an alien prisoner. She was a key to something much bigger. But as much as he was drawn to the power she promised, Alden knew that with great power came even greater dangers. "What do you want from me, Lyra?" Alden asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "What do you expect me to do with this knowledge?" Lyra's gaze softened, but there was still that underlying tension. "I don't want anything from you, Captain. I'm not asking you to follow me. I'm asking you to think, to decide what kind of future you want. Do you want a future where the galaxy—" Captain Alden Cray sat in the war room, his fingers drumming on the table, lost in thought. The room around him buzzed with activity as his crew worked on the latest tactical plans, but he couldn't focus. Lyra's words had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, and now it was growing. The power she spoke of, something so ancient and powerful, hidden away for centuries, was more than just a threat to the galaxy. It was a choice, a decision that weighed heavily on him. For days, Alden had thought about Lyra's warning. The knowledge she carried could change everything. But change it how? Would it bring peace or chaos? He had always been someone who sought order, who understood the necessity of control. But now, as the galaxy seemed on the verge of unraveling, Alden was no longer sure. The promise of peace was always just out of reach, always slipping through his fingers like sand. The meeting he had with Lyra lingered in his mind. When he had asked her what she wanted from him, her answer had been simple: "I want you to choose." But how could he choose? What did it mean to choose between peace and power? Could he trust the factions in the galaxy to use such knowledge wisely? Or would they use it to fuel war, destruction, and domination? Alden knew the answer to that question all too well. History had shown that those in power rarely used it for the benefit of others. The thought of the galaxy descending into chaos because of one single choice made him sick. But was that the only option? Suddenly, the door to the war room opened, and Commander Jace Alver, Alden's second-in-command, stepped inside. His presence, always strong and reliable, did little to break the weight of the decision that lay ahead. Jace was a soldier, loyal and unwavering, but Alden knew that even he couldn't predict what would happen next. Jace had his own thoughts, his own loyalties, and Alden wondered if his second-in-command would see things the same way. "Captain," Jace said, his voice steady but filled with concern, "we've received reports from the Council. They want an update on our mission status. They're getting anxious. There's talk of pushing forward with the peace talks, but something tells me they're more focused on the spoils of war than actual peace." Alden turned his chair toward Jace, his eyes distant. "I've been thinking about that too," he said quietly. "About the risks. The power we might unlock could destroy everything, Jace. I don't know if I can trust anyone with that kind of knowledge." Jace's expression hardened, but there was a trace of understanding in his gaze. "We don't have all the answers yet, but we can't let fear stop us from doing what's right. We need to act, and we need to do it fast. You've always said that the galaxy is a place of opportunity, a place where we can shape the future. But now that future feels uncertain. If we don't act, someone else will. And when they do, it could be too late." Alden felt the weight of Jace's words settle in his chest. He had always known that leadership came with tough choices, but this felt different. There was no easy answer here. The galaxy wasn't just at war with itself. It was at war with the future, with the very concept of what it could become. And in the middle of all this, there was Lyra, holding the key to everything, and asking him to make a decision that could change it all. "I'm not afraid of what might happen, Jace," Alden said, his voice strong but laced with uncertainty. "I'm afraid of making the wrong choice. If we unlock this power, we could bring peace, or we could bring destruction. I don't know what to do." Jace's eyes softened, and for the first time in a while, Alden saw the man beneath the soldier. We've faced worse odds before, Captain. You've led us through hell and back. Whatever you choose, we'll follow you. But you're not alone in this. You've got us." Alden stared at the map in front of him, his mind racing. His crew, his comrades, had always trusted him. But this time, it felt like they were all walking into the unknown together. The decisions he made now wouldn't just affect the people on his ship. They would affect the entire galaxy. After a long pause, Alden stood up, his eyes resolute. "We'll move forward, but we do it carefully. We find a way to control this power, to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. I don't care about the spoils of war, Jace. I care about the future. And we need to decide what kind of future that is." Jace gave a nod, his expression firm. "Understood, Captain. We'll make it happen." Alden's heart was still heavy, but for the first time in days, he felt a sense of clarity. The decision wasn't easy, and it would have consequences, but at least he knew what he had to do. The fate of the galaxy rested in his hands, and no matter how uncertain the path, he would lead his crew through it. With that resolve, Alden turned to face the task ahead. There was no turning back now. The tension aboard the Valiant was palpable as the crew prepared for the most important mission of their lives. Captain Alden Cray had made his decision. There was no turning back now. The knowledge that Lyra carried could change the galaxy, for better or for worse. But it was a risk he had to take. He couldn't afford to let others control the future. And so, the crew of the Valiant readied themselves for what lay ahead. An expedition that would determine the fate of countless worlds. Alden paced in the command center, his mind running through the plan once again. He wasn't one to overthink, but the stakes were too high. The factions they were dealing with were not to be trusted. Each one had its own agenda, and while peace was a possibility, it was far from certain. As he stood there, his thoughts briefly turned to Lyra. She had been quiet in the days following their conversation. There was an unreadable quality about her, as if she were waiting for him to make the first move. She had warned him about the consequences, but now she was the one who seemed conflicted. Commander Jace Alvar entered the room, breaking Alden from his reverie. "Captain, we've got a problem," he said, his voice low but urgent. "What's going on, Jace?" Alden asked, his gaze shifting to the screens in front of him. He could already tell something was wrong. "We've intercepted a transmission," Jace replied, his fingers moving across the controls. "It's from the Inari Syndicate. They've learned about Lyra. They're coming for us." Alden's heart sank. The Inari Syndicate was one of the most dangerous factions in the galaxy. Their reputation for ruthlessness and manipulation was known throughout the cosmos. If they were after Lyra, it meant one thing. They knew about the power she carried. And that could only mean disaster. "We need to act fast," Jace continued. "They're already on their way. We'll be in their range in less than 2 hours." Alden nodded, his mind racing. "Prepare the ship for evasive maneuvers. We can't let them get close. We need to make it to the safe zone in the Veridan Nebula. It's our only chance." Jace hesitated. "And what about Lyra? Should we move her to a secure location?" Alden's gaze darkened. "No, she stays with us. We need her for what comes next." The decision weighed heavily on him. The Inari Syndicate would stop at nothing to seize Lyra, and if they did, the galaxy would fall into their hands. But Lyra wasn't just a tool to be used. She was a person, someone who had already sacrificed so much to help them. Alden couldn't let her down now. As the Valiant powered up for evasive maneuvers, Alden's thoughts turned inward. Was he doing the right thing? What if, by protecting Lyra, he was making the galaxy more dangerous? The path ahead was filled with uncertainty, but there was no time to second-guess. His crew was counting on him. Lyra was counting on him. The next few hours were a blur of rapid decisions and high-stakes maneuvers. The Valiant shot through the stars at incredible speeds, narrowly avoiding the Inari Syndicate's ships. The crew worked in sync, each member playing their part as Alden and Jace coordinated from the command center. The Valiant was fast, but the Syndicate's ships were relentless. As they approached the Viridin Nebula, Alden took a deep breath. This was it. They had made it to the safe zone, at least for now. But the danger wasn't over. The Inari Syndicate wasn't just going to give up. They would pursue, they would fight. And when the final confrontation came, Alden would have to make a choice, one that could determine not just the fate of Lyra, but the fate of the galaxy itself. He turned to Jace, who was watching the radar closely. "Get us out of here," Alden said, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest. "We need to find a way to stop them before it's too late." Jace nodded and gave the orders. As the ship veered toward the heart of the nebula, Alden knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, the fight was far from over. The galaxy was on the edge of a precipice, and Alden had to decide whether to push it over the edge or pull it back from the brink. Lyra stood nearby, her presence calm and watchful, but even she could not hide the flicker of fear in her eyes. The secret she carried, the knowledge that had once been buried deep within her people's history, was now the galaxy's greatest weapon, or its greatest curse. And with the Syndicate closing in, Alden realized that the burden of the galaxy's future might just rest on his shoulders. The Valiant lurched as it entered the swirling depths of the Viridin Nebula. Alden's grip tightened on the console as the ship's sensors flickered, struggling to make sense of the dense gas and shifting cosmic dust that surrounded them. The nebula was a perfect hiding place, if they could navigate it correctly. But the danger wasn't just the Syndicate pursuing them. It was the unknown within the nebula itself. No one had ever fully mapped its depths. The very nature of it was chaotic, unpredictable. If they were to survive, they had to trust in the ship's abilities and the skill of its crew. Alden stood tall, his eyes scanning the screens in front of him, each one feeding him critical data on the ship's status. The crew had done well to evade the Syndicate so far, but Alden knew that wouldn't last forever. The Syndicate's ships were closing in, their sensors more powerful, their pursuit relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had Lyra, and the knowledge she carried. Lyra herself stood near the back of the command center, her expression calm but unreadable. Alden could see the weight of her knowledge in her eyes. She had warned him. She had told him that the power she held could destroy them all if misused. But that same power was their only hope against the Syndicate. If they didn't use it wisely, if they failed to control it, everything could fall apart. "Captain," Jace called from his post, breaking Alden's concentration. "We're not going to make it much longer without taking a defensive position. The Syndicate is too close. They'll have us in their sights within minutes." Alden glanced over at Jace, his second-in-command's face set with determination. Jace was the kind of officer who would give everything for the crew, who would fight until his last breath if it meant ensuring the mission's success. Alden had always trusted him, but now even Jace looked worried. And that worried him too. "Prepare the weapons," Alden ordered, his voice low but firm. He couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. "Set course for the core of the nebula. We'll have the advantage in there, at least for a while." The crew sprang into action, the hum of the ship's systems filling the air as they moved to engage the incoming threat. Alden's heart beat faster, but he kept his composure. He had been in battles before, had faced impossible odds. But this time felt different. It wasn't just the Syndicate after them. It was the future of the galaxy itself, and they were all on the edge of a precipice. As the Valiant plunged deeper into the nebula, the stars outside began to blur into a soft haze of color. The swirling gases created an eerie glow, casting strange shadows across the ship's interior. Alden stared out the viewport, his thoughts racing. Was this the right move? Could they make it through the heart of the nebula and escape the Syndicate's grasp? Or was this just another chance to make things worse? "Captain," Lyra's voice cut through the tension, her words calm but filled with urgency. "There's more at stake than just survival. The Syndicate is hunting me because they believe they can control the knowledge I carry. But that knowledge doesn't belong to any one person. It's not meant to be wielded for power. Alden turned to look at her, his brow furrowing. Then what do you suggest we do, Lyra? You told me this knowledge could save us. If we don't fight back, if we don't use it against them, we won't survive. Lyra's gaze met his, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to slow. I'm not saying don't fight. I'm saying you need to be careful with how you fight. The Syndicate won't stop at just capturing me. They want to control everything, every piece of knowledge, every piece of power. If you're not careful, the fight could consume all of us. If we win, we must win with a future in mind, not just with victory in sight. Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Alden felt the weight of them pressing down on him. She was right, of course. The Syndicate didn't just want her. They wanted control over the galaxy itself. They would twist everything, corrupt it, until the universe was a shadow of what it could be. But he didn't know how to avoid that, how to fight without becoming part of the very problem they sought to defeat. Understood, Alden said, his voice steadier than he felt. We won't let them control the future, but we have to fight to survive first. The Valiant shuddered again, as the Syndicate's ships fired a series of warning shots, trying to herd them into a corner of the nebula. Alden knew the time for talking was over. The fight was upon them. Jace, engage the weapons. We'll make our stand here, in the heart of the nebula, Alden commanded, his tone firm. Aye, Captain, Jace replied, turning to carry out the orders. As the Valiant braced for the oncoming battle, Alden couldn't help but feel a mix of fear-resolve. This was it. The decision had been made. Now they would face the consequences. The Valiant cut through the dark fog of the Veridan Nebula, its engines roaring as it braced for what was coming. Alden stood at the helm, every muscle in his body tense, as he stared at the dark shapes of the Syndicate's ships closing in. The nebula, once their hiding place, was now a cage, the swirling gases cutting off any clear path for escape. It had been a long, tense wait, but the moment of confrontation had arrived. Jace was in his seat beside Alden, his fingers flying across the controls, launching evasive maneuvers as fast as possible. We won't be able to outrun them forever, Captain, he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. We need to take a stand now, or we're done. Alden nodded, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure the Syndicate didn't get their hands on Lyra, and with her, the galaxy's future. He turned to look at her standing in the rear of the command center, her eyes focused but still unreadable. She had remained calm through everything, offering advice but never losing her composure. Yet there was a quiet sadness in her eyes now, something Alden couldn't quite place. Alden, they're getting closer. Lyra spoke up, her voice cutting through the silence. You have to act quickly. If they catch us in this nebula, they'll trap us. We need to leave before they can corner us. Alden's mind raced. She was right. But where could they go? The nebula had swallowed every ship that had tried to escape its depths. If they stayed, they would be sitting targets. His gaze shifted to the navigation console, scanning for any options. We can't get out, not without taking risks, he muttered to himself. His hands hovered over the controls, his mind calculating the odds. Lyra stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she watched the readouts. There's another way. I can help you. We can break through their blockade, but only if you trust me. Alden's eyes narrowed. Help us how? You said before you couldn't just unleash your knowledge. What are you offering? Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of uncertainty. I've been holding back. The Syndicate wants my knowledge, but there's more to it. If I tap into the deeper abilities of what I know, I can disable their ships. It will only be temporary, but it might be enough to give us a chance to break free. Alden felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had seen the power Lyra held before. He knew the consequences of using it recklessly, but right now, they had no choice. The Syndicate was closing in, and time was running out. Do it, he said, his voice firm. "We don't have any other option." Lyra took a deep breath and closed her eyes, her hands trembling slightly. She began to concentrate, her mind reaching out to the energy around them. The Valiant's lights flickered as a soft hum filled the room. Alden watched, every part of him ready for something to go wrong. But as he looked at Lyra, he couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. She was doing this for them. She was risking everything for their survival. The first blast came suddenly, and then another. The Valiant rocked violently, the ship's hull groaning under the pressure. The Syndicate's ships had fired, trying to disable them before they could act. But Lyra's power was working. The air in the command center was thick with tension as Alden fought to keep the ship steady. Then, like a sudden wave of energy, a pulse shot out from the Valiant, rippling through the nebula. The Syndicate's ships faltered for a moment, their systems failing one by one. The sensors went haywire, the weapons shutting down, the engines losing power. Alden didn't wait to see the full effect. He slammed the throttle forward, steering the Valiant out of its stationary position. "Now," he shouted to Jace, "take us through the gap." Jace wasted no time, his hands moving over the controls, guiding the Valiant through the sudden opening in the Syndicate's blockade. The ships behind them were recovering quickly, but it was enough. They had gained a precious few moments. Alden's heart pounded as they broke through the nebula's edge. The stars stretched out before them, their light shining like a beacon of hope. They had done it, for now, at least. But Alden knew this was far from over. The Syndicate would regroup. They would come for Lyra again. And when they did, they wouldn't stop. The fight was far from won. He turned to Lyra, his eyes meeting hers. "We're not safe yet, but you've given us a chance. We're not giving up on this fight." She nodded, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "We must be careful, Alden. The more I use this power, the more it consumes me. I don't know how long I can control it." Alden's jaw tightened. "We'll make it work, together." The Valiant had broken free from the nebula's grasp, but their journey was far from over. Alden stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the vast expanse of space ahead. The stars were bright and steady, but the weight of the coming storm hung over them like a dark cloud. They had escaped the Syndicate for now, but he knew they would come after them with everything they had. And it wouldn't be just a simple chase. They would unleash their full power to bring the crew down. Jace sat beside Alden, his hands gripping the controls as they traveled at maximum speed. His face was set in a mask of concentration, but his eyes flickered with the same concern that had been plaguing them both. "We won't be able to outrun them for long," Jace said, his voice laced with worry. "They've got the resources to track us across the galaxy. We need to think of a plan, and fast." Alden nodded grimly, his mind working through the options. They could try to lose themselves in a distant corner of space, hide in the outer reaches of the system, or even go to ground on a deserted planet. But none of those were foolproof. The Syndicate's reach was vast, and with Lyra's knowledge, they could track them down no matter how far they ran. "Lyra," Alden called, his voice steady despite the pressure building in his chest. She was at the back of the command center, her figure partially obscured by the consoles as she worked to assess the data they'd gathered. She had been quiet since their escape, but Alden knew that her silence wasn't out of fear. It was a focused determination. She looked up when he called her name, her eyes meeting his. "What is it, Alden?" He exhaled slowly, trying to keep his thoughts clear. "We need to make a decision. The Syndicate will be on us soon. We need a place to regroup, somewhere they won't expect. Somewhere they won't find us right away." Lyra stood up, her movements calm, but Alden could see the burden she carried. "There's a system, a little-known one. It's located in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Not even the Syndicate has mapped it fully." Alden's interest piqued. "How do you know about it?" Lyra paused, her gaze distant for a moment. "It's a place I used to go. It's quiet, isolated, perfect for hiding. But there's one thing you should know. It's not just any place. It's a former research station, abandoned and left to decay. But there's still some equipment there, and it could help us if we need to fight back. It might be our best shot." Alden felt a flicker of hope rise in him. This could be their chance. Then it's settled. We head for this system. It's our best option. Without wasting another moment, Alden gave the orders, and the Valiant adjusted course, setting off toward the distant system that could offer them a brief respite. But Alden knew that peace would be temporary. The Syndicate was relentless, and if they didn't act soon, it might be too late. As the ship cut through the dark stretches of space, Alden couldn't help but glance at Lyra. Her mind was somewhere else, and he knew she was carrying the weight of more than just their survival. She held the key to the future of the galaxy, an immense responsibility that would change everything. But as much as he admired her resolve, he couldn't help but worry about what it was costing her. "Lyra, are you sure you're all right?" Alden asked quietly. She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine," she replied softly. "But this power, it's starting to take its toll. I can feel it, Alden. Every time I use it, it gets harder to control. There's only so much I can do before it consumes me." Alden's heart tightened. He had seen what Lyra could do, what she was capable of. It was frightening, and yet, it was their only chance. "We'll find a way to help you. You're not alone in this. We're all in this together." For a brief moment, a flicker of gratitude passed through her eyes. "I know, and I'm not giving up. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you, to protect all of you." The Valiant pressed on, its engines humming softly as they moved toward the unknown. The tension in the command center was palpable, but there was also a quiet determination among the crew. They had survived against the odds so far, and now, with Lyra's knowledge and their combined strength, they were ready for whatever the Syndicate would throw at them next. But as the stars streaked by outside the viewport, Alden couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of an even greater battle. The Syndicate would come for them with everything they had. And when they did, the true test of their courage, their loyalty, and their strength would begin. For now, though, they had a chance, a brief, fleeting chance to fight back, and Alden would make sure they took it, whatever it took.